Prince Turkey, as the advocate of a nuclear-free zone, which has to begin with Israel deciding to give up its deterrent, what can you do to bring that about?
Let me begin by saying that in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, when it was approved, it was considered to be a first step to universal nuclear disarmament, and not just an acceptance of the status quo. And I think recently in the United States there was a proposition like that by distinguished statesmen like Mr. Kissinger and Senator Nunn, and I think Secretary Perry of the Carter administration, and I think even James Baker put their signatures to a proposal like that. So the aim is to have universal nuclear disarmament. On the Middle East particularly, of course, coming from a country from the Middle East, we see any development of nuclear weapons as a grave threat. And I must say, I'm distinctly saddened by the Secretary General's absolvement of Israel's responsibility in meeting that kind of request and demand by the world community, should it be put in the United Nations Security Council. Now, you asked how can one convince Israel to participate in a situation like that. I must say one should not go the way that the West has been trying, or the world community has been trying to convince Iran to give up its nuclear weapons by the sanctions regime. It has not succeeded. Whether it will or not, I cannot say. But I think here there is definitely a moral argument that can be made, not just on Israel, but on the rest of us in the Middle East, that if all of us are urged and pushed to give up the right or the necessity, or however way you want to define it, of developing not just nuclear weapons, but weapons of mass destruction in general, then that should be equally applicable to all the countries of the Middle East. There's been a statement, I remember, by the late Prime Minister of Israel, who was assassinated, Rabin, that if there were a peace agreement in the Middle East, that Israel would consider going that route. That statement, or a similar statement, came out of Mr. Olmert a couple of years ago as well. So here's the way to do it. Let's have peace in the Middle East. And that definitely requires not just the Arab and the Israeli partners in that effort to do that, but also the world community pitching in pushing for peace in the Middle East. These are things that can be done practically, and I must say that everybody knows what the requirements for peace between Palestinians and Israelis and the Arab world and Israel are. It's just a matter of having the political will to translate that knowledge into fact. May I just make another observation on previous issues that were mentioned as far as Georgia is concerned, and the moral responsibility in your question addressed to the Secretary General of NATO, of whether NATO should have intervened in Georgia or not. As an outside observer looking on this situation, another question that poses itself is, does Russia, or did Russia have a moral responsibility from the Russian point of view to intervene as it did in Ossetia and potentially in Abkhazia, recognizing that when Georgia became independent of the Soviet Union, the abrogation of the autonomous regions of Abkhazia and Ossetia by the Georgian government led to the conflict that allowed Russian soldiers to come in as peacekeepers in those days to separate the fighting parties at that time. It's just a question that an outside observer poses, I think, to the rest of our distinguished panel, since I think there is a bit of double standard here as well, that I referred to in my opening remark.
Please.
Thank you, Jim. Hoagland, that you allow me to interfere in this question of Iran. I think the development in Iran is very, very dangerous. The president of Iran is taking into question the Holocaust. The president of Iran is taking into question the existence of Israel. And this is an unbelievable statement from his side. We have now a legislation on the way, I don't know whether the English word is correct, of apostasy. If somebody leaves the Muslim belief, he can be punished to death. Ladies get a life sentence, so this is on the way. So this means that there is a great danger that Iran is on a way in a sort to become, maybe totalitarian might be still exaggerated, but it's the direction. And you cannot demand from Israel to give up its nuclear power as long as Israel is in this environment. Of course, it would be wishful in the end to have a nuclear-free area in the Middle East, and I'm not without critics vis-à-vis the Israeli policy concerning Palestine. But I think we in Europe always, and not because I'm a German, I say it as a European, as President of the European Parliament, we always have to defend the integrity and the security of Israel as such. And at the same time, we must be ambitious to create a Palestinian state. And this coming weekend, we will have a meeting of the Euromed Parliamentary Assembly in Jordan. Until March of next year, I'm president of this assembly. And I think we Europeans should do everything to promote peace in the Middle East, and the Israelis and the other partners, the Arab partners, the Palestinians, demand from us, the Europeans, to make our contribution. And I think we should make this contribution. And once there is peace in the Middle East, I think then we can think of a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East as well. But nobody can demand from Israel to make the first step.
Well, that brings us back really to the central question that Thierry has posed for us all, and I'd like you all to chip in on this, but I'll start with the President of Estonia, perhaps, because it brings us to the question of governance and the change of governance that is needed to respond to these urgent crises. How do we begin to approach the subject of non-proliferation, of the George Shultz Global Zero option that he has been proposing? How do we build into the international system a push for the reduction and eventual elimination of nuclear weapons, if you agree that is something that we should be done? And that's certainly a question for the European Union as well.
Well, I think the first step would actually to develop a better consensus among liberal democracies that, in fact, I think what concerns us is not simply that countries have nuclear weapons, but the fact that what kind of countries have nuclear weapons. And as Hans-Gert Pöttering mentioned here, I mean, we've lived for almost 60 years or 65 years with nuclear weapons, but when they're in the hands of countries that have no democratic accountability and in the hands of leaders who make the kind of statements that the president of Iran has made, that's when we need to have collective action. I mean, I don't think we're going to see the complete elimination of nuclear weapons in the world, and I don't see either the UK, France, or the United States or Russia giving up nuclear weapons, but we can sort of count on reasonable behavior on their part. But the issue is, what do we do with the rogue countries once they have them? And that's quite, and I think we have to be realistic and get away from the idea that there will be no nuclear weapons. I don't see that happening, but at least getting countries that have them to behave responsibly, or irresponsible countries to give them up.